Where are we? We're in New Jersey.
Jersey City.
No, okay. Hello, we're in Jersey City, and today we're going to talk about some interesting things. Mainly today about coffee careers. I love talking about careers in coffee, and what is it like to work in the coffee industry? Because I think there are a lot of, I don't want to say misconceptions, but a lot of things that people think about when you say, oh yeah, I work in coffee. And I wanted to just present kind of a different path, a different journey into coffee that is actually quite relatable to me, myself, on how I got into the coffee industry professionally. Why don't we start with that? So this here is Shiv, if you want to do a quick intro of yourself.
Hello everyone, my name is Shiv. It's usually behind the camera, not in front of it, so this is fun. But yeah, I do a ton of content, sort of digital strategy and partnerships here at Modcup. And it all started when I was like a fan of coffee, and then just really got into brewing at home, learning more. And I think what I loved was approachable coffee shops and cafes who would like be open to talking about, okay, this is this coffee, this is washed, this is natural, this is what that means. Hey, try this, try that. So that's how my love for coffee started, from using a spice grinder to brew French press and wondering why everything was so muddy, to now drinking geishas. And
now you're deep in the game.
From Esmeralda.
Deep in the game, yeah. So, I think for a lot of people in this, I would say, post-COVID world, so I kind of classify it as, I think there is this next generation of coffee professional or industry person that has gotten into it through COVID, or in this post-COVID era, like myself included, where a lot of us started as home brewers over COVID, and you're like, oh, this is actually super rewarding, super fun. I love making coffee. I think a lot of people have dreams and aspirations of opening up their own coffee shop, which I wouldn't do, but that's my opinion.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is like, there are a lot of this, I would say, this next generation of coffee professional, and I think Shiv is a great example of this. But what is your background?
Yeah, so I got my degree in finance from GW in DC, and I started working at Deloitte right after in consulting, which was like this big rah-rah, you did it, you're like the best thing since sliced bread kind of job. And very quickly, I loved the people that I met at Deloitte, but the work and the process of how work was getting done, starting in a project that was like year 8 of 15, I'm like, it's so convoluted and so like, I had no idea what I was really doing in consulting. There were parts of it I loved, like I said, the people, the networking aspect of it, but that was not for me. And then right after that, I joined a tech startup, which was more fun, focused on retail, technology, and user experience. And that's where I'm like, hey, I think brands need to tell stories, and how does that happen? That coincided sort of with when I fell in love with coffee. And I think it was here at Modcup in 2017, before I even knew what coffee was. I tried a natural Ethiopia that literally, it was tasted like blueberries.
Yeah, you had a blueberry bomb experience.
Yeah, and Sacred Coffee in Princeton, my hometown, they did a cold brew, and their nitro cold brew, I just went to try it around COVID too, and I was like, this is wild, fruity. I'm like, I just started looking for coffees like that, and it was super hard to find.
Yeah,
because I think then I was focused on consulting and technology and making money and climbing this fake ladder per se. But yeah, that's sort of my background. That
kind of background and story, I think, is actually what I hear a lot from some of my friends who are now in the industry, and even myself, where you have a traditional degree, you go into an industry that or a role, in this case consulting, which is very attractive, right? Everybody likes these jobs, and people spend a lot of time and effort to get into those roles, and then you kind of land to a point where you're like, oh, what is the point of this? And then you kind of go to the other side, which is something like coffee, which I would say is, in my opinion, incredibly unstructured compared to something like a Big Four or anything like that, and it is significantly more rewarding and more fun. So Kind of what has, speaking of those differences, what is your experience in the coffee industry versus, say, your traditional roles from before? Like, what do you like? What do you not like?
Yeah, the one thing I will say, I think if you find, like, if you take this people first approach, find good people, which, no knock on Deloitte, a lot of these tech companies I've worked at, find the people I've worked with are great. And similarly in coffee, I think you take this like relationship driven approach, find people, connect with people, the coffee knowledge will sort of start. And I think we mentioned like climbing this ladder, this invisible ladder that exists in corporate America.
Yeah.
I had this like mental battle of like, what am I doing? I think I had an existential crisis at like 24. And I'm like, what am I doing? Oh my God. Like, what's my passion? I'm like, I really love coffee. And I had this thought, I'm like, what the am I going to do in coffee? Like, it's coffee. Do I open up a shop? I had no idea what the avenues were. And then you start exploring more and more the content side of things, or, it's still a business running a coffee shop or, e-commerce or anything like that. I did have knowledge of the business side of it. So I'm like, how can I kind of combine the two? But I took this approach of like, okay, let me find good people who I can like, who won't bat an eye to a beginner who's asking questions.
Right.
And that's what I love about coffee. I think more often than not, with a few, peanuts thrown in there, people are willing to like communicate and talk about it, which I love about the coffee world, including you. You always want to talk about coffee.
So I think that's kind of similar, where it's a level of passion. What you're describing is just passionate people in an industry. Of course, like this is with any job, any role, any industry, you find the right team, the right people to talk to. But I more than often think most coffee businesses, at least ones that are still around past this COVID world, or if not, they're new ones that have sprouted. It's like you needed to maintain some amount of relationships with your employees or with the local community, like Modcup here, to actually attract people who might be a little more curious. And if people are more curious, you're actually willing to entertain those things. You mentioned, coffee is still a business. And I want to talk a little bit more about this, because I think what has been interesting with a lot of coffee businesses that I have observed, and this is kind of like the biggest thing if you don't come from this type of industry and you get into it, is its structure. It's like, I think things are incredibly unstructured, and a lot of people prioritize passion over profit, right? And the problem with this is some of these owners of shops or in businesses here, it's like it's too much. I think there needs to be some reasonable, like you still have to survive as a business. But that was kind of like, I think one of the larger learnings that I have had across my few years in the industry is that I do think it is still a passion-forward industry, which is good, but some people do take it a little too far. And it's like, you got to be able to pay yourself. You have to be able to pay the staff here, right? Yes, it's about coffee, but like within reason.
Like, think about like just the simple concept of cupping. If you didn't love coffee, think about slurping, spitting in a cup, thinking about the notes constantly, day over day. Just, there has to be some sort of like, wow, I'm trying this coffee. I get to like discuss it with my team. Building a structure around the passion, I think, is super responsible. But then I feel like coffee is so seasonal that if a harvest comes out and say you've already allocated here's the coffee I'm buying for the rest of the year, and you get a sample that's just like, oh my God. That's where I think like the balance of not having a structure and being like, you know what? This is going to hit well. Your customer base. I want this coffee. I think having that loose structure there, you buy that coffee and bring it home. That adds to the like sort of level of passion that you're talking about.
Yeah, but I think nowadays in today's landscape, there have been a lot of businesses that are trying to keep up with a lot of current trends. I think I mean my main background is e-commerce, and I do think the places that have done a little better are the ones that have kept up with a lot of the trends. I think this is a question that I always get, or if you talk to like smarter people, people outside of coffee, smarter people, I think the observation is, how come you don't have stable SKUs? Like when you look at most of these roasteries, yes, there are blends, but like in coffee, at least where I think what most people who watch these videos and what you and I are into is like there is a very seasonality, and it's like drops of coffee, limited releases, things that make revenue prediction actually quite unpredictable. I think that's something that really surprises a lot of people who are coming out of industry who have like, I would say a very like strong business acumen is they look at it and they're like, well, you shouldn't be doing so many SKUs. But then you find out that in order to grow in some of these spaces with some of these audiences, there aren't really that many sticky customers, I would say. Like in my honest opinion, like if you think about how many roasters most people are trying every day, and if you're deep in the game, you generally are a higher spend consumer and you're willing to drop money on all the new releases, you don't only usually buy from one roaster exclusively. And I think this is something that's quite different than other more developed industries that have consumable. You know, like you're into Miller High Life, right? You're like, I'm not gonna drink anything else, right? I don't know. But
and I think the balance of like also finding like that customer, if we think about it, people are also they're on the move, they're going to work, this, that, they're gonna stop at whatever's near them. I don't want to say the names, Dunkin', Starbucks, right? They're in every corner, but also then your local coffee shop that's just been there for 30 years and you stop there and it's like, we're not that we're competing with them, but those are all factors that a consumer is looking at before they're like, okay, do I want to keep buying this, that, and the other? So that makes coffee super unpredictable.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the type of thing that does make working in this industry very exciting, is that, yes, there is structure, but for sure there isn't structure in a lot of different areas. And that's what makes it very dynamic, very enjoyable. You know, your day-to-days are not necessarily the same all the time. In terms of the work that you're doing currently, what would you say it's mostly? Like what is a day-to-day look like for you?
Yeah, so, well, we started doing like a lot of like strategic content and then actually filming the content, posting it, and I wouldn't have done it by myself. I have a partner, Connor Meany. He's like does all the creative, all the, you know, the video, all the editing, and all the planning, sort of like what are the themes of that month, what coffees, you know, Trav has, you know, ordered and are going to be coming out. How do we build structure around that? So a lot of the time it's like communicating and being like, okay, this is what's coming out in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. Let's plan around that. And then I do a lot of the engagement with our customers on social. So I'm constantly like looking at what other businesses are doing, reporting it to our roastery. Like, hey, like this is a cool, like, you know, trends, a flavor profile. So it's not just social media. You're like listening and seeing where the industry is trying to go, seeing what the consumers are like. So I would say planning, like for, you know, what we're releasing, Connor being like, hey, let's stick to the schedule and not add 1,000 other pieces of content because, well, that's the unpredictability of coffee, right? And then Modcup particularly has like a really strong community around Jersey City. So we're getting constantly people being like, hey, can we collaborate on, saw you had a cool new cold brew release, can we collaborate on that? Or can we come visit this, do a tour of the shop? So being able to balance all that and having a structure of posts, but being a little bit nimble to accommodate the community that we live in. I would say it's that. And then I think one other part of it is like engaging with industry people like you, similar, who don't necessarily carry a bit of a superficial, I know more than you kind of vibe. Like you know coffee, you drink really good coffee. You've worked obviously like with your trip to Ecuador was a great highlight of this year. You can do all that and still not be like super pretentious in coffee. So finding people like that to collaborate with and inviting them to sit down and do this, right? Like that's all part of like the day-to-days, like finding the opportunity.
Basically, it's really difficult to explain what you do. And that's the thing is like when people ask me what I do, I'm like, well, you know, there's a lot of stuff. What you're involved in is it's a coffee roastery. There are now a lot of, I kind of want to talk a little bit about like jobs and roles in coffee, right? So like, if you were to think about the actual work that you're doing, yes, it does help to have coffee knowledge to be able to communicate to end consumers and whatever. But like most of your skills that you're applying are not coffee skills.
No.
And I think that's like the main thing that I just want to present is like, I know a lot of people think coffee is like very tied to this, you know, retail coffee. Like what you are seeing in this video is retail coffee, where there are skills and this is a hard ass job to be a part of. But there are a lot of other things in this industry that are behind the scenes, like that are not customer facing, that are, you know, regarding a lot of back end stuff, like what coffees to release, when to release them, how do you promote it? And these are, this is like a business example, but there's a lot of stuff that always happens.
Then there's like, as you grow, merchandise and mugs and, you want to order shirts, and all of that isn't necessarily coffee specific. Honestly, like everyone posts latte art videos. So like even the coming up with content ideas, you don't necessarily want to just watch and study like coffee businesses.
Yeah.
There's ways to study a car business or, another beverage business like a beer or wine or food. Like studying all that I think is so important too, to like, that's not really coffee related. And if you want to go deep, Q grading, right? That's super coffee focused. Go in there. But I feel like, especially the larger businesses, because when you're small, it's like, I feel like the owner's kind of wearing all the hats. But there are jobs available where you don't necessarily need coffee experience to do it. Like we have an actor, Bryce, who works here as a barista, didn't really have much of a barista experience, and now he's been here for 3-4 months. He's pouring amazing latte art. Yeah. That was an entry point for him to come in, learn how to close, learn, how to clean espresso machines and things like that. And now is loving, loving rush hour. Yeah. For example. So that's another example of like, it can be coffee specific, but there's tons of roles that are not.
Right. And
e-commerce.
Right. So I think, my opinion right now is I think a lot of coffee roasteries are not very strong digitally. And I think, most of what you're doing is digital work. A lot of the work that I have done in the past is digital work, whether that be, pure e-commerce related tasks or like, emails or segmentation of customer bases. There are just a lot of things like data that I think now we're seeing roasteries start to tap into, but I do think a lot of the reason why we haven't seen further exploration is still, my opinion, is more of a capacity from these shops. Is like most of these shops are that we've seen small. It's like there's no way they have time to like do all of that. So what I'm trying to say is you could go to your local shop and maybe pitch some things if you did know how to do some of that type of work.
Yeah, listen, be like, hey, if I can get like a free coffee, 2 coffees a month or a box of coffee, like I will look into your sales data and parse it.
Yeah.
Right? I think you made a point earlier about passion. Like a lot of owners are coffee passion driven. They forget that how do you retarget customers? How do you bring on new customers? How do you grow your email list? How do you retain customers? Because the business owner will want an increase in revenue constantly, but they're focused on the passion side of the business, the coffee. I think you're right. More and more people are getting into the digital side of it. Analytics are so important. And I think that's across like pretty much every industry. But coffee is like kind of late to it, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think we are very late to it. I think the ones that have done a stronger job are the ones that have, at least from an e-commerce perspective, have really tapped into the data, really leveraged a lot efforts there, but more so like segmentation and retargeting, especially through email the email bases.
And like social, don't hate me. I love, like, I can do a heart when I'm pouring lattes, no hate to latte art. I just think like, I'm going to get so much. Just like, I don't know, posting latte art as a roastery, especially as a coffee shop.
As a shop.
As an individual home roast.
If you're an enthusiast at home, you're trying to be an influencer, that's different.
So some of the seahorses and stuff I'm seeing, amazing. As a roaster, the type of content you're posting, I think if you think about it as a lens from like, how am I growing my online sort of customer base? And you can look into then like, if there's ad spend you want to post on Instagram, you can look at CAC and things like that. But that's what we do, right? We take a storytelling approach to all the content. Connor and I, we have a little agency called Hello Koffee. The approach is always like, what type of customer are we attracting? And how is that customer going to start at the top of the funnel, which is engaging the content, and then come down to maybe signing up for our email list or deep cuts, for example, and then converting to. So that's the approach. And that was, conversations with Travis and Jeff, like having those discussions, but taking that approach, it is a data-driven approach. A roaster's not just posting latte art. You could post latte art maybe with the new co-ferment you're releasing and
hope that it
hopefully works, right? Yeah, so using social as a top of funnel to garner interest, to collaborate with, an X Bloom or with Brian, and exposing yourself to different sort of audiences, I think is super important.
Yeah. But what you've described there is also something that I think not many coffee roasteries have even tapped into, which I think is like incredibly basic among most industries. So that's like the thing is, yes, I think we are kind of behind in certain areas, but I think that's why it's like, if you actually want to contribute, say to like your local shop in some sort of way, or you know how to do some sort, we're both of coming from this more from like a business perspective, because that's really where, I mean, coffee is still more of like business, relationship driven. It's not as data driven as it could be. But it's like there's a lot of structure, which I think is quite basic, that isn't necessarily applied in a lot of different areas.
I was working in a fintech role, and I was like, this is so boring. And I was constantly talking to Connor, and Connor's a wizard behind the camera with editing, just does a lot of good stuff. I'm like, yo, like, why don't we do this for like some coffee shops? And it started because of like boredom a little bit from my end, and Connor just being like, yeah, we'll hang out and drink a couple of beers. But like for him personally, it was like hanging out with a friend. For me, it was like, oh my God, like, can this be something? But having like that support, because I wouldn't be able to do it like myself, right? But carving that, okay, I love coffee. I can maybe partner with one of my boys who has an expertise in, say, could be social media, it could be email marketing, for example. And then you're right, going to your local and studying your local roastery,
see who's around,
study it, be like, okay, this is how they're doing their content. Maybe this is where I could add value, or I can go in with questions and come prepared and be like, hey, let's do a month. Just this is what I can offer, and if this is a need, let's keep it going. So if you're passionate about coffee, but not necessarily know how to make the best high acidic pour over, for example, high acidity pour over, or sweet, or you don't know what the next Bolivia geisha is going to taste like, white peach and lilies. You don't need to know all that. You can just be like, I really like it and I enjoy this. I have an expertise in XYZ. Let me go talk to you. You have to take that next step if you're interested in penetrating the industry.
Right, and I think in today's landscape, there have been more roastery owners or shop owners that do realize that is where they can get help at, right? And I am, in terms of like agencies that I see exist in the coffee world, I am seeing more of them pop up, but it is just a harder industry to attract because, let's be real, like this is not the most lucrative industry to be, right? You could take the exact skills you're using and apply them in a lot of other industries and make a lot more money, but they're probably not going to be as interesting or passionate, right? So that's why we're in coffee.
And you having a drone and filming a bird's eye view of a coffee farm isn't without and just posting that's not content. Everyone has access to a drone now. Tell us why. Tell us who you're with. No hate on drones or those drone footages, but you know what I mean. I think you're alluding to this earlier. Get behind the person who's actually touching the coffee. Get their story, because I think that's a good way to build connection. And that's just the social side of it, or like the story to selling side of coffee. But that is an avenue people can enter. Yeah.
So there are a variety of ways. We're just giving you guys some examples of if you were, potentially thinking about tapping into the coffee industry a little more, or you wanted to explore some entrepreneurial things in coffee. What is it like to work in very fast-paced teams? I mean, most roasteries in the specialty world very fast-paced, very small. It would be a very it's quite rewarding to look into.
And I will say, like, the other cool part of it is like the opposite. If you don't come from a coffee industry and you start working with the roastery, just by being around, you're going to learn how to pull really good espresso shots, really good pour overs, learn about like different varietals and, super high elevation geishas that are floral, like anything else. Like Brian got me 2 coffees from Hydrangea that are like ridiculous. You open it and it envelopes the room in their depth, but you get access to all that. So the opposite is true as well, and you will be pouring good latte art even if you don't want to.
Yeah, so that's the thing is like, if you're an enthusiast and you're deep in the game, like you totally can think about talking to shops and getting to know them, especially if you have some hard skills that are applicable to their business.
And most content creators in coffee most of them, not all of them, are pretty accessible if you want to DM them. Don't ask them for free stuff. Like, don't be obnoxious, but be like, hey, how did you get into the industry? Or like, what equipment are you using? Or like, any advice on this? People will.
Yeah, people are generally pretty responsive. Usually, I don't know. I get a lot of DMs and I try to respond. But yeah, just wanted to put another video out there, just like casually chatting about industry-related things, careers, and I thought Shiv was just a good example of this to have you guys listen to.
Yeah.
So, cool.
Take the risk.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
man. Appreciate it.